să ne spuneți care mai sunt proiectele care le faceți în Republica Moldova, dar știm că German Economic Team lucrează de mult timp, inclusiv și pe unele inițiative de modificare a legislației în partea stângă a Nistrului, uneori cu o mai mare reușită, uneori poate mai puțină reușită și datorită contextului politic, dar cunoaștem la fel că faceți analize de fiecare dată foarte bune în domeniul economic, pe situația financiar-bancară, pe investiții și în mod special pentru ceea ce astăzi noi ne-am întâlnit aici, și anume pentru acest raport legat de implementarea Acordului de liber schimb cu Uniunea Europeană și în mod special ceea ce înseamnă exporturile Republicii Moldova în Uniunea Europeană, la fel și care este impactul pe investiții în economia Republicii Moldova datorită relațiilor care există cu Uniunea Europeană. Noi vă mulțumim foarte mult că ceea ce am discutat noi de mult timp în sfârșit se realizează. Începem o serie de prezentări și de discuții și pe platforma parlamentară a analizelor pe care le faceți și noi vă mulțumim foarte mult. Bine ați venit în Republica Moldova încă o dată și în Parlamentul Republicii Moldova și vă ofer atunci cuvântul pentru a începe cu o mică descriere ce înseamnă German Economic Team și ce faceți și după care să trecem deja și la subiecte. Vă mulțumim foarte mult!
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the invitation. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here and presenting our work. As you said, just for the start, a few words about our team, German Economic Team. Our main task is to advise the authorities in Moldova on economic policy making. So this is the government, of course, but also parliament. We have met several times, dear Mr. Speaker, but also the National Bank and other supervisory authorities. I'm the team leader of this project, and this project is a regional one, so we also work in Ukraine, Belarus, and Georgia, so it has 4 countries, and all 3 DCFTA countries. And with me is also the project manager, Voldemar Walter, who is also contributing a lot to the research in this project. And let me just maybe focus on one further task we have. It's not just that we come here and discuss with you issues of policy. We're also quite active in Berlin and in Brussels as partners for policy decision makers in Germany. So we're informing the government about the situation, what in our view are the biggest progress and biggest challenges. And in this context, for example, last week we invited the Minister of Finance, Octavian Armashu, and Sergiu Ciocla, the governor of the central bank. We invited them to Germany. We invited many people from government and from other institutions. And the 2 gentlemen had the possibility to provide a very good review of progress and of reforms in the country. And I think that is needed because you have to tell the story that what's going on here from people doing politics. So should I continue with the presentation? Okay. So a few topics we have looked at before, just very briefly. We did some work on the monetary policy, on the issue of absorbing liquidity for the National Bank. As you mentioned, Mr. Speaker, we did a banking review, looking how the banking sector is developing. And now on the real sector, we have done some work recently in FDI. We did a press conference yesterday with the Economic Council. And this work on DCFTA, on exports, is actually from the start of the year, but it's still quite valid. And it's about exports and DCFTA. And I would like to start looking at exports in general, because export is an important part of the economy and it's something which is quite of relevance for Moldova. And if you see on slide 3, actually you can see that Moldova exports do not go up all the time. There are sometimes it goes down because there are some shocks like the international financial crisis or like commodity prices, but in general, there is a long-term trend towards higher exports. They increased since 2004 by 7% every year on average, in dollar terms. So that's quite an impressive balance. In the next slide, you see about the structure, regional structure of exports. And on the left side, you see this pie showing the structure in 2004, so that's about 13 years ago. And more than 50% of exports went to the CIS, including Russia. So you were still quite integrated with the CIS, which is normal because you were part of the Soviet Union many years ago. But if you look at 2016, the situation has changed a lot. Now, 2/3 of exports go to the EU and 20% to Russia and the CIS. So there is a huge reorientation of the economy. You are growing, becoming more and more integrated with the European Union. I don't want to say it's good or bad, it's just a fact, yeah, that you are very much integrated. And of course, Russia and the CIS are still important partners with 20%. And I think it is important for the country to continue trading with as many partners as possible. You should not get 100% EU. That's not the ideal thing, because EU can also have problems, and then you will feel the problems. Yeah? One further topic I would like to raise is about the structure in goods and services, because when we talk about trade and exports, most people think about physical goods, yeah, machine or wheat or food or whatever. But actually, exports are also services. And this is not just a little bit. Services are quite important in modern world, and they are increasing importantly. And you see here the share of services is 30%. 30% of total exports in this country are services, and they are also more stable than goods. You know, you don't have these declines. You see the decline, for example, in 2014, a decline in the middle one. This is the goods, but the lower one, this is the services. These are much more stable, and that's a good thing about services. Now, very short, on page 6, just what are the main goods you export? Again, 2006, prepared foodstuff like wine, like spirits and fruit juices were by far the most important one. You can see 35% of exports were this kind of goods. But today this has changed. Today the most important item is vegetable products. We're talking about sunflower seeds, nuts, and wheat, and these have 26% of total exports. And interesting also to highlight machinery and equipment. Before it was a very tiny percentage, and now it's 15%. So that's also a huge dynamic you can see there. And now with services on page 8, you see that on services, I would just like to highlight the role of computer and information services, because before it was really not that relevant, and last year, or 2015, it was 9% of total service exports, and that's quite a lot. And this is also the sectors which are really growing fast, and I think this is for economic policy makers. If a sector is growing fast, of course you should look at them very carefully. Now let me come to the main topic, which is the DCFTA. The DCFTA, I think the first thing we have to understand, the DCFTA is not really the start of free trade between the EU and Moldova. I mean, there is a number of measures which were taken during the years. In 2006, the general system of preferences of the EU was extended for Moldova, so you had already some benefits. In March 2008, autonomous trade measures were introduced, and which provided duty-free access to the market. Then came the DCFTA, the provisional application, and then the full application in July. So there are a number of steps which took place here. It's not just before and after this CFTA, but this is more of a tradition of having a quite good policy of becoming nearer to the EU in terms of customs and of standards. And what happened actually? Interesting is that there are also some changes here. As you see, it's not smooth, it's not going up all the time. Sometimes it goes down, but in general, it's increasing quite strongly. And you can see that the increase is actually an average of 10%. Yeah? So before, in total, it was 7%, but here it is 10% on average. So the exports to the EU are increasing really in a very strong manner, over proportion, over a long period of time. So this shows that there are some economic reasons why the two economies complement each other and the possibilities for trade are there. Otherwise, it would not happen. This is not something dictated by the government or by anyone. This is just business who decided, I have the possibility to sell to Europe or to buy from Europe, and this is how this came about. Yeah? This is a market result, not necessarily the result of pure policy. And so 10%, but the interesting thing, and this was something that was discussed a lot in the whole region, and I'm now on page 11, the thing that happened that the implementation started in 2014, and then if we look at the year 2015, the exports to the EU went down. And this was not just for Moldova, this was just also in Ukraine and in other countries. So the question was, what happened? People would expect from such a treaty to promote exports, but they came down. And many people in the region, not just in Moldova, in the whole region started criticizing, yes, we told you we don't have any possibilities in the market, it's too difficult to access the market, and then of course the story, it would be better to have done this with European Economic Union, there are more possibilities there, the standards are not high. All these discussions somehow came up again. But we say, look, let's analyze first the topic and then come to conclusions. It doesn't make sense from one number just to get to lots of conclusions. Let's analyze it first. And what happened in 2015? And that's on the next page. Actually, in 2015, two major things happened for Moldova regarding trade. Of course, one event is the signing of the CFTA, which of course, from the logic, trade is simplified. Of course, it should promote exports. That's a logical thing. But at the same time, another thing happened, and it is that the prices for commodities went down. And as you know, Moldova is exporting a lot of commodities. And just some examples. Price for sunflower went down by 12%, nuts 14%, insulated wire, which is used especially in Belts region and in this automotive industry, 17%. And that means, of course, that this decline in exports, this was not necessarily that you were exporting less physical volumes of these goods, but it might be the case that this is because the prices went down. So the economic activity was the same, but just globally, prices went down. This has nothing to do with the DCFTA. The prices for commodities are determined at global markets, not even in European markets. So this is something that happened just on parallel. And that's why we look very carefully and separated the volume and prices. So there are methods to do that, and actually my colleague Voldemar Valda was involved in this analysis. I'll show you just one more indicator. You see in 2014, the prices, this is an index of export prices, was 100, 2015 was about 80. So you were getting just much less money for the same goods, and this contributed to this export decline. And we calculated what would have happened if the price for commodities and for exports in Moldova would have been the same in 2015 as in the year 2014. And we came then with a quite amazing result. Exports in physical terms increased by 27%. Yeah? So actually you were exporting a lot more to the EU, but somehow this price effect was not able to show the real thing that was going on. Yeah? So I think this is important because the interpretation we can have is that in real terms, in physical terms, the DCFTA contributed to higher exports to the EU. But you don't see that in US dollar terms because the prices were lower, and that's it. And I think it's quite a simple story, and it is important also for the political discussion about if it was right or not to do this step. What about the long term? And by the way, in 2016, exports increased. Yeah, we have this by 6.9%. This is on chart 11. And we also looked at the numbers for the first 9 months of 2017, and the increase in exports to the EU was 17%. Yeah? This time, of course, this was supported by higher prices. Yeah? But 17% is so far the increase in exports to the EU this year, the first 9 months. So you are getting more and more integrated with the economy of the EU. Now, what about the medium and long term? On page 15, we think this DCFTA, and you know that better than I do, this is not just a treaty and that's it, but it has lots of homework to do, lots of things that have to be implemented. And when these things are implemented, means that more and more sectors of the economy will be able to export to the EU. I mean, and this is not just theory. Again, I work in Ukraine a lot. Ukraine now is able to export poultry. They can export fish. They can export eggs. They can export lots of goods. Yeah? And so I think that there is also here a huge potential for getting further products in which you might have a comparative advantage and could sell them to the EU, not today or tomorrow, but maybe in 3 years or in 5 years. And so we are quite positive about the DCFTA, the impact in the short term, but also in the long term. I think this is a good treaty, and this is both in the interest of the EU and of Moldova. So let me just finalize this part. What does it mean for trade policy? Because here, when we talk about this DCFTA, somehow always the discussion comes, what about Russia, what about the Eurasian Economic Union, and so on. This is inevitable. And I think that, first of all, I'm sure you know that, but I have to tell that all the time because even in Germany, many people didn't know that. In ministries also, they didn't know about such things. The DCFTA, it's a bilateral treaty. Yeah? And it's not an exclusive treaty. It's just a relationship between the EU and Moldova. And what you do with other countries is not a topic for the EU. You can have as many treaties as you wish, the same as the EU can have as many free trade treaties as they wish. So there is no exclusivity here. It is different if you join a customs union. If you join a customs union, this is an exclusive club, only with the customs union. But free trade treaties are open for any kind of combination. That means that actually you have a good, I think a very good trade policy of having very many bilateral trade agreements with the EU, with CIS countries. I know there are problems with Russia, but this is politics, this is not economics, this is pure politics. I know you're talking to China, and I think that trade policy in Moldova is going in a good direction, not to be exclusively tied to the EU, because that would not be our advice, but to try to trade with as many countries as possible. And that's why, of course, the conclusion is that the continuation of the implementation of DCFTA makes a lot of sense. And talking about this and putting in question the DCFTA, I think it's not a good thing. You know, this happened somehow at the start of this year. There was some discussion about this. I think this is not a good thing because this might disencourage people, investors, to come here. Because if they listen, the top officials are telling they might revise the DCFTA, this is a signal to investors, oh, maybe the treaty will not continue. Even if this is nothing serious, but just the talk about this can have a negative impact. So I think that it would be the best thing, of course. I mean, we cannot tell what politicians talk about, but I think it's important that politicians understand if they question the DCFTA, they are weakening the impact of it, and they are reducing the amount of investment into the country, and that's quite a strong thing to do, and they should be very careful with their words. So that's the part on trade, and if I have maybe 5 minutes, I would just summarize our research on FDI, and then I'm ready with my contribution. Yes, the second part regards foreign direct investment, and here again, we're economists, we don't like ideologies like FDI is good, we need FDI. Well, show me why FDI is good. Yeah? So we have to look at it. And that's what we did. Yeah? We did, I tell you in a minute how we did it, but first to review the numbers, maybe from the countries, just to tell you that from the FDI that came into the country, 61% comes from the EU. And the second biggest partner is Russia with 28%. That means that here it's quite interesting that both on trade, on investment, the importance of the EU is quite similar, like 61 to 65%, depending on the year also. So it's a similar engagement, a similar level of integration on trade and also on investment. And that's good, yeah, because only trade is not enough, investment is also important. Now, let's come to the analysis. And again, I think it's important just to analyze what's the impact of FDI on the economy. Is it good? Has an impact on wages? What about employment? What about exports? What about public finance? Are they good for them or not? And so far, it was not possible to conduct such a research in Moldova because the data was not there. And what we did, and actually my colleague Mr. Walter was doing the main job here, he talked first to the National Bank, which we have a very good cooperation, I must say. And they say, look, go to the National Bureau of Statistics. They might have some data, and then you look further. And so we visited them, and they say, we have some data, but it has to be elaborated. Let's do it together. Let's elaborate this data together, and then we could have the database to analyze this topic. So we did that, and that's one major result of our project, that now there is a database to analyze this. Before it did not exist. But of course, the results are even more interesting than the databases. That's more for researchers like we are. And what we can show is that actually, if you get all companies with foreign capital, I mean, some have 100% foreign capital, have less than 100%, but altogether, it's 7% of all companies active in the country, 7% have foreign capital. Yeah? 7% of companies. But these companies have a quite bigger size in average than domestic, and that's why they produce value-added, the value-added, net production of 23%. That means that from the Moldovan GDP, 23% is produced with companies which have foreign capital. And I think that's quite interesting. I mean, I didn't know that. I thought it would be less, to be honest. And it's quite a lot. So 23% of goods that I produce here are produced by companies which somehow have foreign capital, not necessarily 100%, but maybe 20% or whatever. And they These are numbers for 2015, by the way. Yeah? This might have changed a little bit in the last 2 years. Employment is 76,000 jobs. 76,000 jobs. In these companies, this is about 15% of employment in the country. 15%, also quite substantial. And now comes a quite interesting thing, because also the government is interested in getting revenue from companies, of course, activity, but also taxes, social contribution. And what we find out is that actually foreign companies or companies with foreign capital are quite good taxpayers. 34% of the corporate income tax is paid by companies with foreign capital, 34%. Why? Okay, it's difficult to know. Of course, they are bigger in size. Normally, on average, they have more capital, maybe some more modern technology. But nevertheless, 34% is quite a lot, and 21% of social contributions. So if I may just sum up this discussion on FDI, if you're in a political discussion and people say, why should we attract more FDI? Why is it so important? Then the answer is quite simple. Say, look, if a company comes here from abroad, normally, on average, they would pay employees a higher wage. We have shown that also. Yeah? And of course, you are interested that people earn as much as possible. That's a central topic for the population to earn more money. And with FDI, you can contribute to higher wages for the population. And that's, I think, already a very good argument. Second, fiscal argument. These companies with foreign capitals are good taxpayers, so they contribute, of course, to the funding of the public goods, which the government produces, the state. And that's also a very important part. And also we've shown that they are quite strong, especially in manufacturing. The pure foreign companies, they export 2/3 of their production. They sell it abroad. So they're quite export-oriented. And that's why we also say that these foreign companies, they're also supporting the work of the National Bank and also supporting the national currency, the leu, yeah? and stabilizing the exchange rate. And that's why I think this is not just some belief or some ideology, FDI is good, you need more, but this is an analysis which shows there is a clear correlation between the level of FDI and the well-being of the population, of fiscal revenues, and also on exports. And that's why we think it's a positive assessment. I'm not saying that any company that comes here is good. Some companies might do some strange things. It's not, it's an average perspective. But I think this gives a good reason for Parliament, for the government, and for the whole authorities to even intensify the attraction on FDI as a way to create jobs and to create a higher well-being in the country. Thank you very much. I'm open for your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll, of course, give the floor to my colleagues to see who has some questions. And please. Or shall I start? Yes, please.
Mă numesc Boțan, sunt președintele Comisiei Securitate Națională, Apărare și Ordine Publică. Vreau să vă mulțumesc în primul rând pentru această analiză și ea ne convinge încă o dată despre faptul că calea integrării europene nu are alternativă pentru Republica Moldova. Bineînțeles că sunt și aspectele politice pe care le-ați menționat. Este vorba despre anumiți politicieni care în spațiu public proliferează cu totul alte mesaje. Eu consider că ar fi oportun ca toată această analiză să fie făcută publică, iar mass media din Republica Moldova să contribuie cumva la acest lucru. În altă ordine de idei, nu am decât să vă spun mulțumesc pentru munca efectuată. Mulțumesc!
Thank you, mersi mult. Cine ar vrea să mai pună întrebări? Aveți întrebări? Vă rog frumos, domnul Pleancă, poftiți.
I want to thank you for this presentation and a few questions. When we were negotiating the DCFTA, there were some forecasts made by German economists who were saying that once the DCFTA is in place, the impact on the GDP growth will be, if I'm not mistaken, about 4%. You analyzed the impact on the export, which of course is the result of the growing economy also. Do you have some studies what's the impact, direct impact on the GDP, or it's too early to judge at this stage what is the direct impact? And speaking about the impacts, today the European Parliament voted the recommendations of the AFET. And one of the recommendations on the Eastern Partnership countries, one of the recommendations speaks about the possibility to join the customs union. And you referred in your presentation briefly about the customs union. And I'm sure that it would take some time, I don't know how long, 4, 5, 6 years, but it would be probably very interesting to see an eventual impact on the economy once Moldova would join the customs union. And I would love to ask you to consider such a study, because again, today, politically it sounds to me very good. Moldova should join, and I hope it will join the customs union, but we should also look at the figures, because I'm sure that the immediate impact would be probably also some negative, because taxes, I mean, the excises, the custom taxes would go lower, and then it would affect the budget and stuff like this. Again, to speak about the immediate impact. One question is about the relationship of the DCFTA and the foreign direct investment. By the way, you referred to Russia as the second biggest investor, and the example is Moldova Gas. And I was asking the speaker if this is a direct investment, because Moldova Gas Gazprom took the shares in Moldova Gas instead of the debt which Moldova had for not paying in time the gas. So to me, it's not a real classic foreign direct investment. It's just taking over the shares because of the huge debt which was created in 97 or 98. But my question is there already a direct link between the free trade area with the European Union and the increase of the foreign direct investment in Moldovan economy? So this would be, and my last question is, of course, you compared to 2004 to 2014, the share of the EU market in Moldova's export. I would love to ask you also to make a comparison with other countries, like Ukraine, for example. Is Moldova more advanced in terms of having a bigger share with the European Union? Where are we on the foreign direct investment? Because the figure you showed that we are still very low, doing very badly on the per capita investment, if we put it this way. So this would be the questions I would love to ask you. Thank you.
On the impact of DCFTA, Mr. Leanka, one thing that is done with models is, before this is implemented, just to simulate what would happen if you just reduce tariffs, and then there is a reorientation of trade, and what would be the impact on GDP. And you mentioned this figure, 4%. We did with some colleagues here a similar study, which the results were a bit higher. But nevertheless, it's clear that it is a positive impact. But this depends on a lot of things, because for me, free trade is just a framework, but you have to fill it with reality, yeah? And you have to fill it with deals, you have to fill it with investment, you have to fill it with climate, business climate, and so on. So the DCFTA per se cannot move much. It is just like something that helps. If you do the things well, it will help a lot. You are doing things well, but if you would not do the things well, it would not help that much, to be honest. Yeah. So, and to separate all these factors will be difficult, but I think it is fair to say that an impact of whatever 6%, 7% is quite realistic. The pure DCFTA, the pure trade. But of course, if you manage to get more FDI and so on, then the impact is much higher. And if you manage that some people return to the country to work or don't leave the country, because then it's also higher. So it's quite difficult to assess that. And I know politicians, everyone loves numbers, but one has to be serious that the numbers are not too speculative, and in that case would be difficult. But it's clearly a positive impact. Then on the EU, and the possibility of joining the customs union, I think this is a great idea, and we will consider that and come back to you, but I think it would make sense to just to explain why it is not necessarily, I can tell you, I'm sure it's not a good idea, but to study that, just to study, because if some people say we should do that, then the question should be, okay, and what about the DCFTA first? And then people say, well, DCFTA, we can go back to ATPs. No, you don't go back to ATPs. You don't go to Brussels and tell, I want the autonomous trade measures again. They will tell you, no, you get now, you're a third country, and you will pay tariffs as third country. Well, yeah. And then it's a question, of course, so you would not keep the DCFTA, that's one thing. You would have to increase tariffs a lot, yeah? Because Moldova is much more liberal than Russia's trade policy. You have much lower tariffs. And of course, investment would be also a great issue. So I think this is not, again, it's not ideology, and we are very much for good trade relations with Russia and with the CIS, but not by joining the customs union. Actually, I work a lot on the customs union, which is now called the Eurasian Economic Union. I was advising the German government on that a lot, how to position themselves to this institution. And I'm not purely negative on that. I think they have some functions they can do on technical things. But when it comes to its motivation, I think I was able to show in a study, which I can send it to you if you want, I was able to show that this was not like motivated by economics. This was motivated by politics. Because the EU tells a country, you want to become a member, of course, not all, but some countries become members. Switzerland has a special deal. Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, DCFTA. Some other countries have free trade. So it's always a positive thing. Yeah? Let's have something, but something positive. And with Russia, it was like a binary approach, what I call a binary approach. Look, join the customs union, or no free trade, sanctions. So it was like, you are with us or against us. Yeah? And this approach, I think, is nothing to do with trade, because trade is always a positive thing. And this is a black and white thing. And that's why I think that, but we will follow your idea, and when we have this, we will be happy to present it here, at least the results. Now, Moldova gas, that's right, according to the international methodology, because the National Bank is using international methodology for balance of payments from the IMF. FDI is not only capital, but it's also debt from the mother companies. So, for example, if I would be an investor in Moldova, I create a company for 100 lei, and they give some debt for another 100 lei. So this would be counted not just as portfolio investment, but also capital, because it comes from the mother company. And that's why I think that Moldova gas, I'm sure that technically speaking, it is a FDI, because debt also can be considered or is considered as part of the investment from mother companies. But I agree with you that the origin of this investment is not typical, and somehow it's a different story than when someone comes here and puts some company in belts and start producing and then exporting it. It's a completely different story, and you've highlighted that very much. And now with comparison with other countries, that's also interesting because, in fact, Moldova is by far the biggest, the strongest integration to the European market is in Moldova from all three DCFTA countries. So Ukraine has also lots of exports to the EU, but much, much less, because Ukraine has also many goods that the EU does not need. Ukraine, I mean, they produce a lot of metallurgy, and they have also all this wheat and corn and all that, and this is quite protected in the EU. I mean, DCFTA, unfortunately, I have to say, sometimes is not as liberal as people think. Yeah, exactly. And the goods where Ukraine is very good, they tell, okay, your quota is filled, you're not allowed to export more, or you're allowed, but you have to pay tariffs or prices or whatever. So, and that's why the structure of trade of Ukraine is very diversified. And of course, the trend is towards EU, but it's also with Turkey, with China, with India, a lot, much more than Moldova. And Georgia, which is the third country, which is far away. Yeah? I mean, Georgia is in general very weak when it comes to exports of goods, very weak, and is in a different region. Yeah? I mean, you're a neighbor to the EU. Yeah? You're a neighbor country. Yeah? Georgia is really, it's let's say it's Europe, not Europe, I don't know, this is another discussion, but it's really, so they have lots of exports, but especially of tourism. The exports of tourism of Georgia are higher than the total export of goods in the country. So they live from tourism. And they have tourists from Azerbaijan, from Armenia, from Russia, from Ukraine, also from Western Europe, from Iran. So they live from that. So the sectors booming that is hotels, construction, restaurants, and somehow this is the model how they make money. Well, you might know that. But so all the DCFTA countries are very different, and by far the most integrated with the EU is Moldova. It's much higher, but per capita, I think per capita it's a good indicator, but it's not the only indicator we should use. I think we should also look at percentage of FDI as a percentage of GDP. And in that measurement, Moldova is not that bad. It's in the middle ground with 41%. Yeah, okay, but it is, yeah. You're welcome.
Much. If we stay a little bit of this
Mr.
FDI...
Speaker, I have a question, please.
Yes. Dar eu pur și simplu vreau să întreb anume în continuare la subiectul ăsta, numai puțin, cer scuze, Corneliu, coming back to FDI and versus GDP, because as I see in the graphic on the slide number 5, indeed Moldova is an average, it's 41% from GDP, irrespective of GDP is small or big, but this is 41, it's a good. But I see Georgia 106, how come? Because it's not really matching with mathematics.
You calculated already.
No, but it's written here 106%.
That's a good question because
In its first place. Then
Yeah.
That's why it took got my attention.
I tell you, I mean, again, numbers are important. We're economists, we start with numbers, but you have to look at the numbers because numbers themselves don't tell the story. You have to know what's behind this. And the first, the GDP per capita in Georgia is not that high. And the second is that Georgia is a transit country, also an energy transit country. You know? So you have Azerbaijan producing lots of oil and gas. Before more oil, now the trend is more gas, and you have to transport this. And I'm sure they will not transport this through Armenia because they are not good friends. Yeah? And Russia doesn't need the oil and gas, they have themselves, Turkmenistan, Central Asia also, so they have to export this to the West. And the only way is through Georgia. Yeah? And that's why the Azeris are building huge pipelines that have already built, and they are building new pipelines that go through Georgia and then also to Turkey. And this investment has also, when you talk about energy, the investment is not millions, it's always billions. You know, so such a pipeline is extremely expensive. But you have also some banks, the two biggest banks there are fully foreign-owned, and one of them is in the stock exchange in London, so the shares of the bank is in London, it's not even in Georgia. Hotels, you have a lot of international hotels that have, and in general, the country is quite stable politically. We had a major change in government from Saakashvili to the what was it called, National Dream, or the new Ivanishvili party, let's say. And it was a high continuity, I would say. People were a bit worried, but it was quite a continuity. So I think many people in the region are happy to put their money in Georgia because it's like a quiet place where you say it's very liberal and they will not, corruption is low. So it's very easy to become a resident there, so you get there, you can open an account. So I think it's quite friendly. I'm not saying it's an ideal country. It has lots of problems, yeah? Economic problems also. Should not be idealized. But the reasons for investment is mainly infrastructure, energy, and that has to do more with the geography than with the business climate in the country.
So if to take into account your example with the energy, where we talk about billions, if, for example, now Moldova now is in discussions with the foreign, especially the international organizations and the foreign banks, investment banks like EBRD, World Bank, Central European Bank, for the energy project, which is the interconnection in the electricity between Moldova and European Union through Romania, through a system called back-to-back stations. And for example, for only one project in the south, the project itself, the value is 300 million euro, which a part of the money will go as grant will come, part is loan. I would say around 70 to 30.
40 million euro, right?
No, 80 million is grant, 80 is grant, and rest 220 is a loan. That's the last, at least the discussion. How will this be counted by you as an economist? Will this be considered as FDI?
This is not a company in the EU or in some other country investing in the country. This is an official loan or some development bank or EBRD. And this is a loan provided to an institution in Moldova. And this institution then would conduct the investment. So I think that in that case, as far as I know, I don't know the details on these deals, but I would think that this is not FDI. This goes into the balance of payments as official debt, of course, but not as FDI. If a company, if a Romanian or a German company would decide to to invest into power generation, or a pipeline, then it would be the case. If it's private investment or foreign investment. If it's a loan, then I would say no.
So, like for example, if this Transgaz Romanian one is buying the gas pipe between Romania to Moldova, and it's an investment of almost like 140 million euro, this will be a direct investment.
Yeah, this would be, yeah.
Or the Romanian, like Romanian bank, like Banca Transilvania, which is coming now in the.
This is a typical
foreign
direct investment, and I hope I'm really looking forward that this. It's a success, this selling, because...
The deal is on the table, seems to be, and today or tomorrow the central bank is giving the permission, so it's a matter of time.
I think it's a real measure step.
It's just 60 or 90 days based on the legislation for the transaction to be done at the stock exchange. So
Yeah.
this is only the time. Another question is about, and then I will give also to my colleague the floor, it's about the value added. You are mentioning here when we are talking about FDI, you also count beside FDI per capita and share of GDP, it's about the value added.
Yeah.
How exactly, and what is the methodology, or not in details of course, but how do you see this being part, what is exactly value added?
Well, all companies have to report to the National Bureau of Statistics, financial statements. In these statements, they tell how many people they have working, how production, and then you have also the profit of the country and the value added. This is the generation, how much they paid for workers, how much they paid, so how much the difference between what they bought and what they sold, this is the value added. The gain, exactly. What they put on the goods on top. And all these companies, they provide this information to the National Bureau, and the National Bureau puts this together, including the information, is it a purely domestic country, is it a mixed country, or a foreign country? And that's how this is how we got this information. So it's just using official data. It's not our estimation, it's the use of official data from the National Bureau of Statistics after having developed them further together.
Yes, but at the same time, the added value depends on the profile of the company and the industry. Because in some of the industries you have higher value, higher added value, and then other less. Like for example, for informational technologies, you have higher value because maybe you have, or vice versa. It's less because you have high salaries and you have less sales.
Of course.
In terms of volume. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
A trade company, a purely trade company would buy for 100, sells for 110, so it's little, but...
And just the last question, it's about the union, the customs, as you were mentioning. You said as long as we are not part of any custom union, then we can have free trade agreements without any limitations. And today, actually, we have DCFTA with European Union, and we have free trade agreements with the countries from CIS countries. Then we have free trade agreement with Turkey, and we maybe will have one day, sooner or later, we'll have with China. Most probably. But if we are part of European Customs Union, that means that we cannot have free trade agreements anymore as we discussed with this Turkey, CIS and China?
Well,
based on your experience.
That's exactly the question I got. I mean, between us, this is not official discussion, but I got the same question in Ukraine because some people are pushing for I think the presidential administration in Ukraine is pushing to become part of the customs union, and I told them, look, it's a bad idea, a very bad idea, because that's the situation that actually Turkey has. Turkey is a member of the customs union of the European Union, yeah? And the situation is as follows. If the European Union makes a treaty, only the 28 countries are negotiating. Turkey is not negotiating because it's not a member. So the negotiations with Canada, with Moldova, with other countries were done by the 28 members or before a bit less. And afterwards, after the treaty is signed, Turkey has just to open the doors for the partner country of the EU because they are part of the customs union. And they have to ask the partner country, look, I would also like to sell you my goods. And they're in a very asymmetric situation, and this is not very advantageous for them. And the reason is that Turkey became part of the customs union in Europe because the idea was that in a few years they will become members. But then this process was stopped, and they will stick in the middle. And I would no country advise to become part of a customs union because you would have to get rid of your free trade agreements with the CIS countries. Yeah? Because you lose your independency in trade policy. You would have to adopt all the tariffs from the EU. You wouldn't have own tariffs. You will have only tariffs, customs tariffs from the EU. They're exactly the same. That's the condition for a customs union, for all goods, normally. And that means that the treaty you have with Ukraine, you cannot keep it because you have free trade there. Of course, they have also, or with other countries. So I think it's not a good idea. It's very asymmetric. And politically, you will see when you start implementing this that people will not be happy and there will be some backlash and critique. Why did we do that? So I'm very much discouraging Ukraine of that. The European Union doesn't like it at all. I mean, DG Trade doesn't like the idea at all. And I would not advise you to do that. I mean, you might, if it's a first step towards becoming membership, that's one thing, that's okay. But if not, then it's another question.
How long would it be to negotiate joining? But again, as Mr. Botsan said, because for us there is no alternative but moving towards the EU, getting the status as candidate, which hopefully should happen within the, 2-3 years, then the customs union would be a natural step in this process. Not just joining and forgetting about the rest. No, for us it's just within a bigger picture.
But what are the benefits of joining? One thing is political, like symbols, which are strong, and this can push investment. I agree with that. But what would be the major difference between today and having the customs union? You would have to open the market for African countries, which have free access to the EU, GSP, General System of Preferences, all the colonies of France. They can export duty-free to the EU. You would have to accept... Well, but you cannot have too many bananas. That's not good for you. Again, this is a preliminary version. We can, if we look at this, we might look for this issue for Ukraine, so we can look at also for Moldova. This is I would say not to be very enthusiastic about this. There might be some other advantages. For example, you could then export duty-free to Canada because Canada has a trade agreement with the EU. It's a complex thing to analyze, but it's not an intuitive thing which would say yes, and you would lose your independence in trade policy. That's.
Thank you. Corneliu, vă rog frumos, puteți.
Da, mulțumesc pentru prezentarea atât de interesantă și detaliată. Am două întrebări. Deci noi în ultimul timp în Republica Moldova avem foarte mulți investitori străini care tind să facă investiții în zone libere, care sunt create la noi în țară. Am vrut să vă întreb, avem și exemple concrete, compania Fujikura, care este un gigant în economie mondială, tot a intrat recent pe piața noastră în zonele libere. Am vrut să văd care este părerea dumneavoastră despre tendința asta. Asta prima întrebare și a doua întrebare ține de exportul carnelor pe piața europeană producătorilor moldovenești. Deci, producătorii noștri, mulți producători din Republica Moldova au calitate bună la standarde europene, dar deocamdată nu au acces pe piața Uniunii Europene. Ce părere aveți dumneavoastră despre faptul ăsta și când Uniunea Europeană vor deschide piețe pentru producători de carne din Republica Moldova? Mulțumesc!
Well, these free economic zones, that's something which is debated at a lot of places. It's a difficult question. I mean, ideally, in an ideal world, you don't need free economic zones. In an ideal world. But of course, the world is not ideal. And sometimes, if you can promise, if investors are worried about controls, about people coming and asking too many questions and not letting them work properly and all that, to tell them, look, you will have only one inspection per year, and you will have customs at the entry of the free economic zone, and they will be working all day and night, and such things. Of course, this can be an advantage. So I think it makes sense to somehow provide some good infrastructure and some security that there will not be a harassment by authorities, by tax authorities or by customs. But what I don't like is when you start like giving too many fiscal advantages. I think this is not what it should be done, because I think all companies should be treated almost equally. And if there is one company in Chișinău producing normally and paying taxes, why should another one in a free economic zone without paying taxes? Yeah? So I think it's important, everyone should be treated in a similar way. Okay, some advantages, infrastructure is one thing, but tax policy and all that, I would say, if a company comes here, they have to contribute to the public, to the budget. I mean, they're working here, they're producing here, they're using the motorways, they're using the infrastructure, they're using everything, they should pay for that. That's my position at least. But I know there are differences between the people. And the more you start talking with people concretely working on that, the more they like these instruments because they're able to attract investors. But so I think as it is now, it's okay, but I would not make free economic zones as the main instrument of investment attraction. I think that, I mean, you have very competitive labor force, yeah, with high education and low wages. This should be enough. You have a free treaty with the EU. You are a neighbor of the EU. The language skills, I mean, it's different going to countries in which they don't speak any international language. Here, lots of people speak English, but also Romanian is an European language, is similar to others. So it's much easier to communicate. You have enough advantages. And I don't think you have to give much more. And also, I know companies, of course, we like companies, but once you start giving things away to the companies, they always want more, you know. They got this money, I want a bit. So it's like a competition who gets more money, and that's not the kind of investors you want to have. That's at least my position, but I must say, I'm sure other people have different positions on that. And with meat, I mean, meat is very difficult, very different. There is pork is one thing, and pork there is the swine flu, which is quite a topic. At least Ukraine is not allowed to export because of this swine flu. Then there is pork. Lamb or other types. It depends on the type of meat, but actually, in principle, you're allowed to export meat to Europe or to the EU, but these standards, I'm not sure if you're able to fulfill them yet. I'm not sure about that. No, because meat is the most difficult thing, because meat in the EU, you have to tell who was the grandfather of this cow and who, I mean, you know more about the family of a cow than of normal people, you know, in the EU. And they are very strong on that, especially remember that UK had this mad cow disease, and they had, that's why the standards are quite strong, and it's difficult getting it to the market. But as far as I know the treaty, there is no limitation now that you are not allowed to export meat.
If I may follow just on Cornel's question about the eggs and meat or poultry, which, as Speaker rightly says, it would be the first priority. In your studies about the impact of DCFTA on the economy, on exports, have you identified few industries which have the potential to grow and to have its products competitive on the EU markets? Because I'm confident we still can increase a lot the exports as a result of direct investment, but what are these key areas, except agriculture, processing industries, especially because I'm sure on eggs, we should have already exported it in 2015, at least for industrial purposes, but because of our crisis, we forgot about the important things. Eggs, meat, chicken especially, or poultry, but what are the other industries which should be a priority for the government and which could, again, bring this additional value for our economy?
General, of course, I mean, the first answer would be that companies are more clever than that, the economy. So ideally, the companies themselves would know that, but it doesn't mean that we cannot help just by thinking about this. And actually, we look at one sector. We look, this was a request from the Ministry of Agriculture, and they asked us to identify products where there is some lack of supply in the EU, and which are quite strong in Moldova. And we produced this report with colleagues from the University of Göttingen. They specialize on agricultural economics. And actually, they, I think I have to study here. Well, I have to look. But I can send you. They identify some goods in the agricultural sector, but also in the food industry, which in principle, it's realistic to increase exports in the short term because Europe needs that. Because for some goods, Europe is a net exporter. I mean, garlic. Yeah? Garlic is completely protected in the EU. Yeah? It's very difficult to export garlic to the EU. It's so much protected. I don't know which country is behind, but pork, big exporter. Yeah, Germany, Dutch, Netherlands, Spain, they produce a lot of pork. For other products, there is a need to import. And of course, you have to look the niches where there is a lack of production, and which are good. And I would like to send you this two studies we did, and you can see that.
Thank you very much. Just as a matter of actually introduction, Mr. Leancă is the head of European Integration Parliamentary Committee, Council or whatever the committee, the council. Yes, and it's the information that you are providing, and those still to be provided will really be of interest for the members of the council, because then they can supervise, watch, come with suggestions, also towards the government. And if just one more question, you said you were quite professionally involved in assessing the Eurasian Union or Eurasian Custom Union. Politically here in Moldova we have discussions and we have debates between the government and the majority in the parliament towards and one another side the president, who is coming always with political messages related to the accession or at least to become closer to the Eurasian Union. And he sent some letters to this union to become observers without any binding legal impact. But still, from your point of view, does have any economic effect to become closer in the context that you know where we are and how integrated we are with the European Union? Does have any economic reasons to be closer to Eurasian? Not political, only economic reasons.
But there is also geography. Ukraine is between us, which should not be ignored.
Well, again, we're in general in favor of a diversified export structure. That's important. Remember the euro crisis some years ago, demand from Europe was quite weak. You never know what happens. So you have to have many partners so that if there are shocks, these shocks are not too strong. And I think, I mean, this is, you have now bilateral treatments with many countries, and also the CIS multilateral free trade agreement from 2010 or 11. I mean, one idea, but this is a very wild idea. Don't take it as a recommendation. Yeah, just one idea. You are having sanctions from Russia. Yeah, so on meat, on wine, or whatever. Russians want this Eurasian Economic Union to be like upgraded. No? So you could say, look, let's have a free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union. Not with Russia, not with Belarus, but with the Eurasian Economic Union. You could have a free trade agreement. And substitute the existing ones with this. Because in that case, again, it's a wild idea. Don't take it as a recommendation. I would have to think about this, but that's a spontaneous answer. Because in that way, the Russians say, okay, this helped us somehow to put the economic union on the top, to look, it's working, we're having free trade agreements, so they will be happy. And of course, in exchange, they will say, look, but for that, we want the sanctions to go. So you would have some advantages from that. And again, the economic union is not just Russia, it's Kazakhstan, it is Belarus, it is, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and I think that treaty with them is not necessarily wrong, because also these countries need to be taking, they can influence trade policy stronger than if you have also only bilateral relations. So this is a possibility. But from the potential, I think that I see myself more potential with the EU than in this part, because again, we saw what happened in the Slovak Republic. We saw what happened in the Czech Republic. We saw in Hungary. I mean, these were quite countries which were not very developed after communism. And then the foreign investment came. Romania, they came, they started producing. And now there's almost no difference, yeah. If you go to Warsaw, it's no difference to Berlin really that much, yeah. So we saw that. And there is no need to invent something new, actually. So I see a future in saying, look, the strong integration with the European Union is indeed a way to increase welfare quite quickly. So I see the CIS not as a major substitute for that. I mean, not to exclude it, but not to put an emphasis on that.
Thank you.
Referitor la ce ați spuneți despre Uniunea Euroasiatică, permiteți-mi să nu fiu de acord. Am avut recent anumite discuții cu unii reprezentanți ai legislativului din una din țările pe care ați menționat-o dumneavoastră, și această Uniune este una extrem de politizată și doar un mic conflict politic care se află în două țări la hotar a provocat închiderea hotarului între două țări care sunt membre a acestei Uniuni. Deci regulile pur și simplu nu se respectă. Din acest context consider că nu se pune accent neapărat pe economie, ci se pune accent pe politică. Nu cred că este oportun pentru Republica Moldova să facă asemenea lucruri. Deși s-ar putea crea impresia că din punct de vedere economic, în teorie, ar fi bine. Însă realitatea care o confirmă cei din această zonă este cu totul alta. Este totul foarte politizat. Merci.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I studied all these trade wars between Belarus and Russia, between Kazakhstan and Russia, or chocolate, mayonnaise, and then, I mean, it's not a customs union. It's on paper a customs union, but in reality, it's not a customs union. I'm just thinking here, you know, it's more symbolic. Yeah, it's symbolic, saying, look, we don't have anything against you. We are friends, yeah? When you talk to the Russian partners, we would like to improve relations. We would like to continue to sell more goods to you. Why not? Wine and so on. And just, if you say, to mention that it is just a possibility. It's something productive. I don't say this will happen tomorrow, but it's just a way to come into talking again and to try to improve the situation. Not more than that. Yeah.
By the way, because we were talking about, and you were giving some information that Moldova is more advanced in being more integrated to European Union than much more advanced than Georgia and Ukraine. Do you have analysis where you analyze all three countries towards European Union, comparing through many other, except DCFTA, except the FDIs, more like legislation through different areas. Do you have some studies like this?
No, we didn't have comparative studies. I have it somehow in my head, but I mean, we work normally on request of governments and parliaments, so they ask us to look what's the situation about Moldova, the others ask about Georgia, and nobody asked for a comparative study. But actually, what we did also with colleagues is to see how far the implementation of DCFTA is in different countries. And that could be, we could summarize that. We could provide a summary of how far the implementation is. We did it for all three countries. And then, of course, trade and investment, and this gives a view. And actually, we could do that.
Why I'm asking is that we are entering definitely in a stage of strong competition between three countries. Because if by the European Summit next week we'll be taking a decision to start a new program called European Union +3, that means that Georgia, Ukraine and Moldova will be put together in a pool in the relationship with the European Union, and definitely there will be a competition. It already started symbolically and politically, the competition between three of us. But now it will be more and more, and everybody would like to have a leadership in many areas, and therefore analysis that you will eventually come then would be very useful for us, for all three countries, and of course for Brussels and the capitals in the European Union.
Yeah, but until next week to do that...
No. But nobody was saying this. No. Definitely it's not for later, next week, but later on, and definitely here in the Parliament we will have discussions like this. If necessary, we can look, technically speaking, for some of the analysis or studies that we might need here in the Parliament or at the level of the government, and for you to be engaged in those studies.
That's interesting, and again, we can draft something, but I think just by mentioning, say, look, we are the #1 country when it comes to integration with the European Union. That's fair to say, it's a fact. Yeah? We have some Soviet heritage, but our trade with them is little. And we are oriented, FDI exports tightly integrated with the European Union. So we are quite near economically already. I think it's an argument, and we can provide you some arguments for that. Yeah.
So if nothing else is on the floor and on the table, we thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
I think this was very useful for all of us. You produced many good studies and analysis. We saw also your last analysis in the banking.
Mm-hmm.
This was also definitely a very useful tool. We'll still keep on working together, and we'll be open for such discussions on different levels, and we thank you very much. We appreciate for the presentations and the information you came with.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I hope to see you again soon.